This is going to be a recap of The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly summarize each of the chapters. I'm going to give you exactly what happens so that you can remember and see how the story stacks up. But I'm also going to give a couple of musings. If there's something I like or really enjoy in that chapter, maybe we'll bring that up. And if there's something I think is going to happen, maybe a guess, I'll throw that in there as well. So it should be a fun ride. This covers chapters 1 through 9. And it's about 95 pages of this edition here. So let's jump into it. As a reminder, this is the second standalone book. First, we had the First Law trilogy, which I loved. There were so many fantastic characters in it. Sandan Glokta, who is maybe one of my all-time favorite characters across any book ever. But we also had the wonderful and mischievous Bayaz. We had Jezal, we had Pharaoh, we had Logan, we had West. We had so many fantastic characters. And then we were introduced to the dark poetry that is Joe Abercrombie, the interweaving storylines, the absolute brilliance that comes to nothing, the absolute nothing that comes to brilliance, and it all culminated with a big bang. From there, we had Best Served Cold. Best Served Cold was grim and subverted your expectations at every single opportunity. And although objectively I can look at it and say that is a masterpiece, for what it was and for how it did what it was to me, but realistically it was just so grim and self-depreciating and self-loathing, especially some of the characters that we spent most of the book inhabiting their brains and mind and perspective, one of which is already pretty prevalent here. I have to say Best Served Cold wasn't my favorite, and that leads us on to the heroes. There is a war raging, it is multi-sided, and we begin with Craw. Chapter 1. We meet Craw. He is on the side of Black Dow. Craw and his named men and women head to the Heroes. The Heroes is a big rock formation that has been around since as long as anybody can remember. When they get to that rock formation, they see another crew of named men, which are on the side of the Dogman, which is on the side of the Union. Instead of battle commencing, they talk them out of there based on their superior numbers. So that crew on the side of the Dogman, on the side of the Union, leaves, and our first dispute is settled without blood spilt. What we see is pretty clearly that the Heroes is going to be a homonym. It's going to be that large hill, maybe even a mountain, which is going to be pretty central to battle, it would seem, considering it's the name on the book. But also, the Heroes probably refers to the fact that we have a multi-sided war, and we're following some of those who will be remembered as heroes on either side of that. Chapter 2. Shivers comes to get Calder. Calder is the son of Bethod, one of the main protagonists of the previous book. Calder is there with his wife. Shivers arrives, grim and menacing, and tells him that he is needed for a meeting. Calder realizes he doesn't really have any option, so he goes with Shivers. This is something I love about Joe Abercrombie, is the characters are interwoven into the book without much ado. For example, Shivers was such a big deal in Best Served Cold. He's one of the main characters, and we saw such a journey of self-loathing and change and pride and ego and highs and lows. And although it wasn't my favorite book in the world, it was fantastic, and we lived in his head for so long. And all of that is kind of put aside, and he arrives immediately in this next book, and he's just a grim, menacing dog of Black Dows, and it just goes to show how unceremoniously Joe Abercrombie brings people in and out, which is kind of like life. Chapter 3. There is a different meeting going on the side of the Union, and they know that somebody from the closed council will be arriving there to take charge and give orders on what's to happen next. A surprise to everybody there is actually Bayaz who turns up. Bayaz is there, and so is Gorst. There's brief talk of Makato and the happenings of Best Served Cold, and then Bayaz drops the bombshell that this war must be finished quickly so that they can face the war on the other front to the south. He insists on speed. Inside of Gorst, we see a bitterness. He has had a rough ride in the previous books, having been beaten by the current king with the help of Bayaz very unfairly, and then absolutely humiliated and put through the ringer by Shivers and his gang in the previous book. Gorst is feeling pretty bitter about life. And that all comes through when we see how he reacts to Finley and his beautiful wife, just going about their lives. This is set up for Gorst to have a pretty terrible time or a pretty aggressive redemption arc. One thing I must say here is Baez is always playing 4D chess. So what is he playing here? Why does he want the war to end? Is it as obvious as he says? He wants this war to end so they can focus on the South? Or is there something more important about the heroes? My guess would be the second thing. Chapter 4. We join Black Dow's meeting. Included in it is Shivers, Calder, and the chiefs, the war chiefs from Black Dow's army. Stranger Come Knocking arrives from further north. It appears that he has come to fight everybody and everything. He has come for blood. However, he will be fighting on the side of the north, which is Black Dow currently. He makes the bold prediction that Calder is meant for more than fighting. It seemed to be prophetic. They briefly discuss the Bloody Nine. Dow reckons him dead, but we know different. And I think everybody is just hoping that they don't see Logan again, rather than believing it. So from this chapter, Dow is impressive, but we already know that he is not the man. He wasn't even the man in a small group of named men, but that group did contain the Bloody Nine. My guess would be that he does not make it out at the end of this book. However, he is clearly the alpha dog of the people who are gathered for the North right now. Chapter 5. There's a bit of philosophy by Craw speaking to Wonderful and some of the others on the hill. They really come to the conclusion that none of them care about this war and that Black Dow probably isn't the person to follow. As they come into this conclusion, Shivers arrives to shore up their resolution to hold the heroes. It's mentioned in this chapter that the heroes is man-made. Shivers is just going around creeping people out because he is a creep and very strange. He makes everybody uncomfortable, even me, the reader, because I know what got him there, and it was just grim, which is why it's called Grim Dark, I suppose. The mention that the heroes is man-made, if this was Sanderson or another person, another author who was more inclined to perfectly set up and pay off, that would be all I need. But this is Abercrombie, so that doesn't necessarily mean that my predictions here about the heroes being something potentially made by Baez or potentially more important is definitely true, but I'm still leaning towards it. Chapter 6. Tunney awakes and the sun stabs him in the brain. The old drunk and gambling expert who has been around for a long time in the army is given 4 brand new recruits to train. All the joys. Tunney appears to be a classic Abercrombie character, wants nothing more than to be selfish and act out on his own desires and interests, and will probably go about that for quite a lot of the book and then do some kind of feat of heroics beyond most men and then return to his selfish self. Chapter 7. Beck is a young man with a named father who isn't around any longer. He hears talk that there's Carls recruiting in the village, so he picks up his father's sword and his mother's cloak and he goes down there to be recruited. Down there, he almost has a scrap with one of the other boys who is there to be recruited. Most of them look sickly, way too young, or just not into it. So he decides to join up with ideas of glory in his head, but we know better. A desire to prove himself a hero never turns out good for anybody in any of Joe Abercrombie's books. A good example of that would be Jezzel and Monza, maybe. And although both of them finish in a politically powerful position, which bodes well for Beck, neither of them have a good time. Neither of them learn the hard way that glory is not all it's cracked up to be. Neither of them learn the easy way that glory isn't what it's cracked up to be. I believe Jezzel has multiple madnesses happen to him, but the main one being he gets absolutely obliterated in a fight and his face completely changes. Monza, that happens to her about 8 different times, and once pretty aggressively at the start of the book. But regardless, his story will be one to watch and follow. Chapter 8. Calder goes looking for an ally. He thinks he has one in his father-in-law, but when he gets there, instead of an ally, he just has to settle for someone who isn't actively going to try and kill him. And then somebody actively tries to kill him. Calder survives through no fault of his own and picks up 2 bodyguards during the process. Chapter 9. Those of Dogman and the Union who were dispelled from the heroes in the first chapter return. Battle commences, and those on the hill manage to hold it valiantly. They kill 8 men and only lose 1 of their own. Here we see some of the brilliance of Abercrombie. We get Craw's build up, very nervous, very distracted, and then we get one word punchy action throughout, which really paints the picture. Then it ends with the philosophical line. He's done the right thing. Maybe. But then again, maybe there's no such thing. This really sums up Joe Abercrombie. The whole chapter, we're getting Craw's doubts, his beliefs, what could go right, what could go wrong, all of these things. His mind is racing, and then at the end, he feels like he has a conclusion, a philosophical conclusion, and then he just says, well, maybe there's no such thing as the right thing, which really does sum up Joe Abercrombie's books and attitude towards writing. I feel like the morally grey people are right one moment and wrong the next, and it's entirely dependent on perspective. And it's always a good time and very fun to read. And I think that chapter and the ending of it really sums it up. And he does this a lot, Joe Abercrombie. He'll have a character have like a eureka moment, for example, feel like they decide and figured something else out about their life and the world around them. Then the experience of the chapter will maybe prove that or maybe change that, and then near the end, their philosophical saying will completely flip on its head. And like I said, it's a lot of fun, and it helps you ask some questions about life in general. And I feel like reading him makes you more open to interpreting your life differently as well, which is great. So it was a good, fun addition to have some philosophy in your life. Next up is day one, and I will be back to talk you through that, and we'll give you another recap. Give me your feedback. Was this helpful? Have you actually read this book, or were you just joining along so that you can enjoy the ride as well? I suppose this maybe could be classed as a read along also. Some predictions, nothing too bold because we haven't read that far. I would definitely guess the heroes was, well, we were told it's man-made. I'd definitely guess that it's an important magical artifact in some capacity. I would definitely say that Beck discovers that he should have stayed at home with his mum. That's another one I'm going to bet on. And finally, I would say that Calder is set up to have probably the biggest upwards shot. So why do I say that? Well, I think the Stranger Come Knocking prediction will probably ring true in some sense. And then also, he's just seems to be like a survivor. He seems to find a way to survive. He knows what his limitations are. So I think that his grit, determination, and weaselness will allow him to be on top by the end of at least maybe the North, you know. Potentially he just cuts the deal with Baez, which seems to be the end route for anybody who wants to win long term. But we shall see. Hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.